Attention. Hello, hello, hello. Hey, everybody. How y'all doing? I'm Ryan Patton, the chair of art education. If I don't already know you, if I do know you, hello. Good to see you tonight. I just wanted to do a little housekeeping before we get started. Tomorrow, if you do not have plans, between 10 and 1, Dr. Barrett will be doing a critique workshop over at Bow Street. So if you go all the way up to the 5th floor of Bow Street, you can and go all the way to the end of the hall. There'll be a critique workshop that Dr. Barrett will be doing tomorrow for the end of our Teach Appreash week. Also to recognize one of our teachers here at VCU, Courtney Wolfgang, who will be doing the introduction of Dr. Barrett here, is leaving us. She's heading over to RISD, and we have a couple of cards here that we've had people sign throughout the evening tonight. I don't know if we were stealthily enough able to prevent her from seeing it, but these are here for you, Courtney. Thank you so much for everything. You're welcome. I'll keep talking just a little bit longer so you can, like, get the verklempt back. But thanks everybody for coming out. The food will still be out here after the talk is over. There'll be a little bit of time of Q&A after Dr. Barrett's done. And thank you.
Thank you. Oh, hold on. I lost my doc Those of you who know me know that I am a habitual paper note haver at presentations, and I deviated from my path this time. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Good evening. I'll do my formal. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for being here to welcome Dr. Terry Barrett, critic and arts educator. On behalf of the Department of Art Education at VCU, I'd like to welcome you, Terry, and thank you for being here this week during our annual Teach Appreash festivities, honoring the teachers, present and future, who make this program really thrive. Dr. Barrett is the author of some of the most foundational texts in the field of art education and for teaching art criticism, including Crits, a student manual, Why is That Art? Aesthetics and Criticism of Contemporary Art, Making Art, Form and Meaning, Talking About Student Art, Interpreting Art, Reflection, Wondering, and Responding, and Criticizing Photographs, An Introduction to Understanding Images, and more. I had the honor and privilege of being Terry's student at The Ohio State University before he retired after 40 years of service to the Department of Art Education and the Department of Art at Ohio State. There, I developed an essential part of my arts pedagogy through Terry's principles of interpretation, including, but not limited to, all art is in part about the world in which it emerged. Interpreting art is an endeavor that is both individual and communal. And to interpret a work of art is to understand it in language, and that meanings of artworks are not limited to what the artist intended them to mean. So please join me now in welcoming Terry to this podium now for his talk, Art, Personal, and Communal. Dr. Barrett.
Thank you. I have a mic.
Oh, you got it.
Thank you. Thanks, Courtney. It's very nice to be here. This is my first time to Virginia Commonwealth, and I know you by reputation, and I got to meet some of you over the last day and evening, and I've already seen some wonderful art and all kinds of wonderful facilities, including this one. So I'm much more comfortable doing casual presentations. I'm certainly not going to read a paper. And the more interaction we can have, the better for me. So you can stop me at any time. You can make comments or ask questions. We have a couple microphones here. I don't know, the acoustics seem pretty good, but if we can't hear you, then we'll use microphones. So with that, this is definitely about the personal and the communal. I don't want to have one without the other. I want to have the personal, but the personal for me is not enough. especially these days, where we're really in contentious times, where we're really struggling with one another over all kinds of issues, including the environment, and whether the environment will continue to support people as we know them. These are really serious times, and I think personal art is wonderful. But I want us to do something with personal art. And I'm talking to you tonight, sort of presuming that you're all artists of some sort. So I'm talking to you as makers. But I should check, how many are studio people or makers? And the rest are, how many are art education? And any designers here? Okay. Yeah, is there one? Welcome. What I'm trying to share with you tonight is the power of art. I think art can be very powerful, but only if it's interpreted. If it's not interpreted, it's not powerful, probably, at least in the sense of changing society, of making changes, of making improvements in society. So I'm interested in how the personal interacts with the communal and how the communal affects the personal. And most of the material I have is based around interpretation, how people interpret works of art. And this work, a lot of these slides I've never shown before. It's new work that I'm doing with my wife, Susan, and also with Laura Evans at University of North Texas, who's a museum educator. We're really interested in how what I'm calling ordinary people, everyday people, how they interact with contemporary art, mostly contemporary, almost exclusively contemporary, rather than historical. And I use the word community loosely, meaning people who are gathered together. Like, I think we're a community for the next hour and a half. And maybe it'll expand time-wise, or maybe it'll expand people-wise, but I view us as a community. And I want to apply what we're doing to studio critiques, because I think that's an area that's understudied. This is not examined closely enough, and I have some recommendations. So this first slide is by Wei Hai. He's both like an abstract expressionist and a traditional Chinese painter. And this is a fairly recent work. It's ink on paper. So just notice it for a while. And then I want to show how one person interpreted it. One person, her name is Sherry. She was a returning student, a mother of grown children, finishing up an undergraduate degree. But she looked at this painting in class and privately wrote this paragraph about it. I'm going to read these just so we keep pace. I hang out over the precipice, my branches reaching for the earth below. My hold on this cliff is precarious, and I sense my time here is limited. The waterfall nourishes my body, but not my soul. And I wait for something, anything, to set me free from this place. Even the birds will not build their nests within my branches, as they also sense I am in danger. Do you know what it is to live your life on the edge, waiting to fail? So, waiting to fall. That was Sherry's response to this, which surprised her as she wrote it. She learned something new about herself. She thought that she had survived cancer, and she thought she was finished with it. She thought it was in her past life. She wasn't under treatment anymore, but she realized she's still really afraid. And she got to feel that and express that in response to this painting. So it's very personal, but also it's communal in the sense that she's allowing me to share it with you now, and she shared it with classmates at the time. So from that intense personal experience, we got some communal closeness, which I think is very important. Or this one, this piece. This is by Glenn Lagan, To Disembark, 1993. Sort of very conceptual work. And I asked, Susan and Lori, and I asked different people, which artworks, or can you name an artwork, do you remember an artwork that affected you in a serious way? And this is one response. It's by Steve. He's in his 40s. Again, filled gallery rooms with wooden crates. Wanted posters offering rewards for the capture of runaway slaves adorned the gallery walls. The interior of the crates played blues and sounds of symbolic travel. The exterior of the crates had stenciled information like that used on crates to ship cargo. One crate referred to Henry Box Brown and his feat of mailing himself packed into a wooden crate from Richmond, Virginia to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1849 to escape slavery. The crate was about 3 by 3 by 2 feet. Brown was, and I am, 5 foot 8 inches tall. I imagine myself folded inside one of those crates for 29 hours upside down. To me, that really invokes personal empathy, both for Steve and for people who experienced this. And I think empathy is crucial these days. I think we need empathy to change the world. So this was a powerful example to me of what an artwork did, what a dry conceptual, work of art did in a white cube. And again, this isn't just Steve's personal reflections. He's sharing it. He's sharing it now with consent with you. So it's beyond the personal. It's becoming communal. Or this piece. This is a piece by Olafur Eliasson. It's called Ventilator. That's the piece as you would see it. Well, he described it this way. A ventilator is attached to a cord and suspended from the ceiling. An electric fan swings erratically and irregularly through a space propelled by the air it displaces. So that's sort of a typical artist description. It's very cool, unemotional, factual. But here's a response by an elderly woman who saw the piece in a gallery. And when you're in the gallery, the fan is circling over your head, and as it displaces air, it changes directions depending on what the air is bouncing off of. So she spontaneously wrote, "Ventilator is like my personality, no direction of its own, moved by the whims and wishes of others, sometimes noisily and sometimes quietly, but never stopping, always responding to people, events, tasks, and my own inner desire to please, appease, keep peace, keep up appearances, and keep a sense of accomplishment." So again, for me, that was very poignant and beautiful, and I'm positive, as one can be, that Eliasson would really be moved by that also. He describes it very analytically, but his work, he wants his work to do something, and here's evidence of what it did to this one woman and then she shared it, and other people could reflect on what she was saying and thinking. And I think the piece became all that more powerful. And without interpretation, it's a fan whirling around in an art museum, like, what's that about? You might walk through and wonder about it, but if you don't stop and think, and if people don't respond, not enough happens. This is a piece by Ann Hamilton. It's called Wall of Tears. This is a very close detail. The piece is, it's a large wall, I don't know, 12 feet by 16 feet. It just seems like a plastered wall, but as you get close to it, you notice that it's dripping continuously, and you don't even see where the water goes, but it just keeps falling very silently. And she calls it Wall of Tears. And this is how Susan responded to it. Susan's in her 50s. My son had recently passed on. I walked into a museum in Pittsburgh and saw Ann Hamilton's Wall of Tears. No one else was in the gallery. Tears dripped randomly down the length of the wall. I cried with this wall. I could grieve privately with a wall. I became aware of the potential of a personal connection with works of art, with a work of art. The artwork opened my view of things, people, and conditions. I began to see the interconnection of all life, the many pieces and particles that come together to create things and experiences and their dissolution. So, again, a very personal interpretation, which she's sharing. And she's learning, sort of like Sherry, she's learning about herself and her continuing grieving and anxiety, but she's also, it's opened her up to people and conditions and to a new view of things. And that, to me, gives more meaning to Hamilton's piece, or different meaning, or meaning to think about. And without that interpretation, I wouldn't have that. This is a piece of the Tate Modern. This is a story that Witska wrote. Witska, a young woman from Amsterdam, walked into a hall of the Tate Modern in the museum. A young conceptual artist she did not know came up to her, looked her in the eyes, and told her about a time he played tag in an orchard, and everyone was running around and chasing each other, but no one was chasing him. Witska said, I could feel it was really his own story. He was sharing a vulnerable moment. I recognized his feeling of being lonely among others. I remember how often I felt that way in the schoolyard or at a discotheque. We shared an uncomfortable feeling of not fitting in. The moment told me we are all just human beings and highlighted the importance of making connections. So that's quite a response, I think, to a work of art. And Witska's, in her writing, she wants to change her life, and she wants to understand the artist, and the artist must feel like, I've been understood, something has happened, something positive has happened. So those are some very personal reflections on works of art that are shared with others communally. And by and large, those interpretations were formed individually by the viewer, one-on-one, quiet thinking, quiet writing. These next interpretations I want to show you are they're interpretations made in a community of 5 people or 30 people or whatever, and how the individuals in the community build to get a communal understanding and reach richer individual understandings because of the community. This is a piece. I happened to see this in China at a contemporary gallery. and it was small, like 8.5 by 11, just ink on paper. And it's as simple as that, but it's very complex if you try to interpret it. The interpretations are endless, and the artist doesn't even tell us whether to read up and down, or left to right, or whether to read all 9, or just 6, or just 3, or pick, make your. But however you read it's going to change your interpretation, I think. So Susan and I took this to a group of 8-year-olds at a local Montessori school in Florida, and we enlarged it, as you can see, so that they could see it, and we let them talk about it. We didn't talk about them. It's no introduction really, except here's a picture that we want to talk about, that we want you to talk about. And we had rules that they agreed to, that only one person talks at a time, everyone listens to that person, and everyone refrains from side conversations. And I use these rules with 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds. I mean, these are crucial rules for me to facilitate a group discussion. And then on television, we're seeing ABC The View, where everyone's talking over everyone else and interrupting everyone else and not really listening, or they're only listening in order to rebut, or sports programs like Pardon the Interruption, which is, they're not pardoning the interruption, they're interrupting on purpose, and they're making points, and people aren't listening. So these are crucial to me. And I would use these same principles in a studio critique of your own work. And they all follow them without problems. And sometimes people don't follow them because they're not taught that way. But so then it just requires a gentle reminder. Hey, we're one at a time. Don't talk to her because we want to hear what you have to tell her. It sounds pretty important. So please tell all of us. So it's very gentle. It's not right, wrong. It's more like it's for a community. It's for a community of people who talk and listen. To talk and listen. So to start with, the question was, what do you see? Or what are we seeing? What do you see? So these are just random responses. They saw a head with legs, not with a neck or shoulders, but with legs. A smiley face with 2 legs. A man with an egg-shaped head. They eventually called the figure Eggman, so that became communal property. We're all going to refer to him as Eggman, just by use. They just came up with that. And then they didn't know who was confronting or who was interacting with Eggman. Was it a bully or a ghost? They noticed that none of the characters make eye contact. They interpreted the lines as yelling or screaming or bullying or vomiting, spitting water. Someone thought of it as like a hairdryer or a weed whacker. Someone said the bully drank something, didn't like it, and spit it out. Ryan thought the screaming made Eggman's head fall off. So these were just observations that they had, and they were listening, one-to-one. Someone else would say something, and we weren't taking turns. It was just sort of a spontaneous discussion. So Chase summed up the story this way, and this is like a direct quote. We had it on tape. So basically, Eggman is happy, walking down the street, tweet, 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 said the bird, and then this bully comes along screaming and does something and breaks his neck, and he's sad, but then the bully says, okay, I'm going to go back to help him up. And then Eggman becomes happy again, but he still has a broken neck. So that's Chase's take on the event. And I was troubled by whether or not to show this set of images to kids, to 8-year-olds, because I didn't know how they would respond. And the images seemed to me pretty violent. And the 8-year-olds weren't, they recognized that, you know, a weed whacker or a hairdryer or, you know, spitting, throwing up on someone, but they weren't troubled by it. And I just asked them, well, after all this stuff, how come the people are all smiling? What's going on here? What kind of explanations do you have? And they came up with things like, someone called it the circle of life. Someone else said, the summary was, you can't take away my happiness no matter what. So they had those very personal, sort of unshaken belief in themselves that was really precious. I don't know how much of it was due to the Montessori environment, which is very supportive. And I haven't had time to take this to other, I'd like to take it to other 8-year-olds and see what kind of responses I would get. But that's what we got on with this group. This work is called Two Eggs. It's by a couple from Russia, living in New York. And it's not Photoshop. And actually they don't reveal how they made it. But I brought a set of these images, about 15 or so, to some 8th graders in a Catholic school outside of Columbus in Upper Arlington. And there's a group of about 18 kids that pulled out of their classroom and sitting on chairs facing the images. And again, I didn't introduce the work except to say, we're going to look at these and see what sense you can make out of them. So they described it first. I usually ask, what do you see? Because I don't want anyone to jump into conclusions or I don't like it, or to work into some kind of fantastic interpretation of what's going on. I want them to be based in the image and just, you know, what do we see? What do the artists present here? So they noticed that they called it a real egg and a fake egg. And they didn't know how to refer to the woman, but they were very aware of her complexion and her eyes and the makeup on her lips and her hair and the veil. And sort of and again, the fake egg and the real egg. And what are they doing with this? What are the 8th graders how are they making sense of this? So we talked about a dozen of these images, similar, and then they went back to their classroom, and I invited them, with the permission of their teacher, to write about these images, write whatever they wanted, individually or in small groups, in, you know, a group of 2, maybe, or 3. So this is what Maria Swartz came up with. She's age 12. And this was from 3 notebook pages, handwritten lines and notebook pages. And the caps were hers, and exclamation points and underlining. I translated it, I wrote it, I typed it out as accurately as I could. So Maria is saying, I think the real egg symbolizes what the girl wishes she could have or desires in reality. It doesn't have to be an egg. You can be holding peace, desiring peace in the world, or happiness among people, unity. The real egg in her imagination is in her imagination with an invisible hand. When she comes back to reality, she realizes that what she really imagined to be true isn't real. Seeing is not believing. Believing is seeing. The girl in the picture is imagining what could be real and what really matters, the egg, and nurturing it, love. So that's spontaneous writing. I excerpted it from her longer piece, but I still have the actual handwritten pages that she wrote on. I don't know this was a while ago. I don't know where she is now. She's probably at RISD or or VCU or who knows where. But then the same image by these artists, I don't know if I'm doing that or what. Anyway, we took it to a group of adults who were cancer patients and their caregivers, and showed, about 6 images, and again, just had the viewers, what I call ordinary viewers, just talk about what they saw, and then what does it mean to you in your own personal life? That's the part of interpretation that I switched to later in my career. Like, what does it mean to you personally? I don't care so much, I shouldn't say that, I care what historians say about it, but I care more about how it affects you and your life. And if you have the historical interpretations, but not the personal, I don't think you have too much. I mean, you have knowledge, but how valuable is that knowledge? I think the personal knowledge is really what counts. So in this small group, Barb wrote this paragraph and then shared it with the group. She read it out loud. They all did. They all wrote a paragraph and read it out loud to each other. And there were about 8 people. And some of them were caregivers who really have a hard time because they don't get any sympathy, but they do a lot of work, both emotional and physical. And then the actual patients who are going through chemotherapy or radiation or whatever. So Barb says, in my health situation, I see the solid white egg as the decision to take chemotherapy. The transparent egg is radiation. The chemo egg weighs heavy on the veiled hand, not knowing how it will affect my life, my body, my family, my spouse, our love life, and my work environment. The sense of wonder in her face reminds me of how I felt once I absorbed the fact that I had cancer. So these are highly personal, and I asked them, the 8 or so people, if I could take their writings, and they could say yes or no, and I did not put pressure on them by any means. And I was a cancer patient at the time, so we had similar situations. And every one of them wanted their work to take it. And then I gave them the option of, it can be anonymous, because some of them were worried about they didn't write well enough. So I said, fine, just leave it anonymous. Maybe put your age, just so we have some kind of reference. But every one of them turned them in, and every one of them had their names. I chose to use first names only in this situation. But they wanted, they wanted to be heard. They wanted to be understood. They wanted other people to see what they were going through. And I think the artist would be very pleased with that kind of, personal reaction. Their art really means something. These everyday viewers aren't doing a formal analysis. They're talking about life and death based on this image and sharing it. The sharing is really important. This isn't just in their private diaries or journals. It's out loud, and then out loud because I get to bring it to you with their consent. This is a painting from 1958 by Barrett, who's a Mexican surrealist, who was a Mexican surrealist. Laura Evans found this image and was intrigued by it, and she brought it to her college classes and wanted them to interpret it. And they first described it, and some of their descriptions, they noticed a small chamber, a medieval-looking tower, a sparse geometric room on the top of the stairs, a thin woman sitting at a table, dull brown dress, hair straw-like and golden. Her face looks tired, bags under her eyes, complexion is sallow. So these are individuals, but from a group of about 18 college students, just throwing out these ideas. or recorded them, copied them. So that's what they started with. But then to go further, they noticed more, they didn't go too fast. In our work, we're really trying to slow people down. And people are very willing to slow down if you ask them to, if you give them a time, if you give them a chance, if you really listen to them, they really do slow down and tell you some very interesting things. So they notice the crescent moon in a cage, the moon looks sad, the woman works a grinder, crushing elements of the cosmos, piped through a tall tube that reaches through the roof into a cloudy night sky. She spoon feeds her caged moon. So they're noticing details. And I love doing this in groups because they notice stuff that I didn't notice. And every time I show an artwork to a group, even if I'm very familiar with the artwork, inevitably someone points out something that I didn't notice. And it's humbling, but humbling in a good sense. It's like, wow, this work is richer than I knew it was. And thank you for pointing out something, because if you had not, I would have missed it. Or if you had called it a different word, or if you had described it in a inaccurate way, that would really influence how I understood the image. So this phase takes a long time. And I think, as an educator, I think just doing this phase is oftentimes enough. I think it's often enough just to notice very carefully what you're seeing. But of course, I like to go further and say, what does it mean? So this is Becky, and she says, both the moon and the woman are trapped in a symbiotic relationship and are just feeding off of each other. The moon could be what we were supposed to be, or what people think you are, or what you want everyone else to think you are. Becky, by the way, is not an art major. Laura is teaching art appreciation for undergraduates, not for majors. It's a non-major course. So these are, again, what I'm calling ordinary viewers. Of course, there aren't ordinary viewers, but non-art viewers. And, Becky, she made sense of the image. Or rhyme, I'm not sure how. I see the hungry moon as my daughter, and I think of the cage that surrounds her as all the ways the world will keep her in, keep her down, keep her small. Then another wrote, her exhaustion is a visceral and familiar feeling. The dutiful and labored way she rallies for the moon reminded me of making soup for my grandparents, caring for my ailing husband, breastfeeding my daughter in the middle of the night. So those are three individual interpretations out of a group of maybe 18 undergraduates, non-art majors. And then after that, which way am I going here? After that, I did some reading on Celestial Pablum, the painting, and there's a critic in the Brooklyn Rail who recently, like in the 90s, said this sort of casually, in Barrow's Celestial Pablum, an isolated woman sits in a lonely tower, a blank expression on her face, and mechanically grinds up stars, which she feeds to an insatiable moon, a powerful symbol that describes the role of women in the 1950s. Well, these undergraduates picked up on that. This is a sophisticated historian critic who sums it up very nicely, in a sentence. But they're picking up on that just from what the artist has presented. And I think that's a credit. I don't think we give enough credit to ordinary viewers to interpret works of art. So I want to apply all of this to crits, to studio critiques, because they're crucial to higher education, art education. So I think this, I just grabbed this off the web, but this seems to me to be a rather typical, probably a rather typical critique, college level. I assume that the woman on the left with the light hair is the professor. I presume the person in the pink shirt is the student. And I would assume that the other people are, fellow students. And typically, that the artist is nervous, defending the work, trying to explain it, and that's how they usually go. I mean, critiques, in my experience, are pretty much the artist explaining their own work, and then people respond and they tell them, you could do it better if you did it this way, or you could clean up your could clean up your intent by considering this, or have you thought of that? It's a lot of advice giving to the artist, whether they want it or not. And unsolicited advice, we know from psychologists, is criticism in the negative sense. If I start giving you advice about your life, it's like, so I think too often that's the way crits go. And I don't think that's the way they should go. I think studio critiques are special times for artists who talk to one another about each other's art. I don't think it's up to the artist to both make the work and then have to explain it and defend it. I would rather have the artist show the work and listen to how people respond to it, listen how ordinary viewers or fellow artists respond to it, and not to have the artist explain it or justify it, and to have much more description and interpretation rather than judgment. In the prior slides, we didn't hear any, I like it, I love it, it's great work of art, or that sucks, or you should do this or should do that. They accepted the work as it was given to them by the artist and then worked with it. They didn't ask the artist to change it, or they didn't ask the artist to do it their way, and they accepted what was there and tried to make sense of it. I think critiques might be more effective if they were more like that, rather than making the artist defensive about their work and making them justify it and giving them advice. So that's what I'm advocating. And the book it's full of true stories by artists who are now mature, reflecting back on their undergraduate days or their graduate days. And people have painful stories about critiques. Almost everyone does. When they share these, and then in the book I'm trying to find out from people who are students who are in the critiques what they would rather have. What are you looking for? What would be helpful? So the book is full of that, and it's full of ideas from other professors of how they try to change critiques in their own teaching. And this, to me, is the principle that successful critics leave everyone wanting to make more art, everyone. And so often it doesn't happen. I mean, people are leaving crits crying or giving up their majors or sometimes worse. And I don't think it should be that way. I think it ought to be that, that you come away motivated because you're seeing how people are taking your artwork seriously and how they're making sense of it and what they're doing with it. So that's where we are. So I'd very much like to open it up to discussion. Anyone have any comments, questions, opinions, disagreements? Yes, we have a brave soul. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I have had the privilege of watching you facilitate with within a community at NAEA before, and been personally very moved by that couple that makes those images. Anyway, I still think back on that and am personally moved about what you guided me and everyone in the room to experience on a personal level. So just a note of thanks for that. It certainly informs how I and what I do today, so thank you. But my question is the very cool idea that popped into my head, and I'm sure is in your head, about this idea of how the artist might feel about knowing what the work does in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you've shared these interpretations or stories because you're working with contemporary art, with the contemporary artists, and what those exchanges might be like.
That's very much the heart of what I'm trying to do tonight, is you are artists. People take your work seriously when they're given the chance to. And you and your expression can really change people's lives and build better communities, better, more empathetic, more understanding communities. So that's the heart of it. And this is, in my mind, this is like a compliment and a thank you to you, the artists who are making these images. But I think it's my responsibility as an art educator, or our responsibility as an art educator, is to help people do this. Not to lecture at them, but to really engage them in close looking and talking, where you have to, for these kinds of responses, you have to have a very safe environment. The cancer patients are dying, but they're feeling or not, but they feel safe in that situation, safe enough to really share what they're going through. And they're empowered through that, and they're also sharing knowledge. They're learning about themselves, we're learning about them, we're forming communities of empathy, and it's just really important work, I think. But I think we shortchange art by looking at it too quickly, or giving a formal analysis only, or making a judgment. Even if you say it's a great work of art, well, so what, or why, or how, or, what does it do to me? Does it do anything to me? So thanks for the comment. Yes?
I don't need the microphone, I think. Can you hear me okay?
So far?
So my name's Ian, I'm a high school teacher. What would be some advice you would give public educators on trying to elicit these types of responses from our students? Obviously you just said make a safe space, but any prerequisite planning, suggestions, anything?
Well, I remember from Edmund Feldman, who's very old now, who really got art criticism into the art education curriculum. He thought it was really powerful when kids could see that their work meant something to their fellow kids. So it's not so much. There's certainly room for teaching people how to make art, or how to make art better than they would otherwise without teaching. But I'm suggesting that can happen one-on-one or in a lecture. It doesn't have to be a critique. By a critique, I'm advocating for a group discussion that is not dominated by the teacher or the professor, and where people or student artists take responsibility for the outcome. You don't need a professor to have a critique. You just need to get some fellow students from the dormitory and look at your work and talk about it, and you stay back and listen. One of the things when I conduct critiques, I don't ask the artist to speak. Worse than that, I ask them not to speak, just to listen. And I've done this with some professional artists. Sandy Skoglund, for instance, she was a visiting artist at Ohio State, and she was fascinated with what people came up with from her work by looking at her work and talking about it just the way we are. She hadn't heard that stuff before. And she's a well-known artist, and she has been written about. Most artists don't get written about. Skolkin, did, but she was still fascinated and she wanted to hear more, and she didn't want to explain what she was trying to do. And I think sometimes it became clearer to her what she did do by the way that people responded to her work. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is somehow empowering the students if they have something to say and you're interested in hearing it, especially during the critique. Other times during the class, you want to show them how to do this or how to do that, and you can do that one-on-one or as a group, but that's different than having a discussion. That's simply, didactic teaching. Which is a good thing, but there's room for these other kinds of approaches. There was a hand next to you, behind you.
Kind of piggybacking off of your question, as you're thinking about like how do you foster that in a high school classroom. I'm thinking about how you're talking about the personal and communal, and that sense of that a lot of the conversations coming out of a feeling of safety. And I'm wondering, what are a couple of things you would like to see happen differently in art museums in relation to these personal and communal connections?
Yeah, I love it when I get invited to work in a museum. I would much rather work with the original work of art rather than with a reproduction of it, and I've done a lot of that. And then when I have to use reproductions, I try to pick works that are reproducible. Like the line drawing, I don't think we lose too much by enlargement of it. We certainly lose some, but not too much. Or I love to use Barbara Kruger because her work, there's no original. I mean, it's all reproduction in her mind, and she doesn't care. Early in my writing, I wrote a chapter in criticizing photographs. I wrote a chapter on one of her pieces, and then I had to seek permission to reproduce it. And I talked to her on the phone, and I said, I told her what I was doing and what I wanted to do, and she said, "Oh, sure." And I said, "Great, would you please send me a picture that I can reproduce?" And she said, "Oh, I don't have that one anymore." And I thought, I wrote the whole chapter. I don't want to start over with a new image. And she said, "Well, where'd you get the one you're using?" And I said, "Just off of a magazine." She said, "Use that." No problem. However, same edition of that book, I used a work by Joel Peter Witkin in New Mexico, and he sent me in handwritten, in plywood, an authentic, original photograph of his, and he said, "Please return it when you're through." And so for him, quality of reproduction was crucial, and for Kruger, it's not. So anyway, the point, I still use Witkin, even though I can't reproduce him as well as I'd like to, but some artists lend themselves to reproduction better than others. I don't usually use sculpture. It doesn't work, which is a real limitation, but when I'm in a museum where sculpture is available, I certainly, use that. And I like sometimes to let the viewers decide which work of art they want to concentrate on. I'll easily go into a gallery and say, pick a work of art that you want to talk about, or that you want, just pick a work of art that you're interested in. And it can be that you hate it, or you love it, but pick something that there's something going on. And that's so much more successful for my work than me choosing the image for them to talk about. And same way, sometimes in critiques I'll ask the students to pick one of the images they would like to talk about that's not their own. And then that's interesting in itself because some images get chosen and some don't get chosen. And I think the ones that don't get chosen, they're probably not as invested as the ones that do get chosen. I'm not even saying more skillful or less skillful, but I think students sense that, there's more here to grapple with than there is on this one. I'm going to pay attention to this one rather than this one. So I think letting down, When it comes to high school, where I might feel obliged to have everyone's work talked about, I might do it over a couple days. Or I might say, we have 45 minutes and there's no way, I've got 25 kids, and there's no way if we did everyone's work, everyone would get 45 seconds. And I don't want to do discussion at 45 seconds. So anyone want their work to be discussed? Anyone not want their work to be discussed? And so we narrow it down that way. And then over the semester or over the year, if I have the kids for a whole year, I'll make sure that, you know, everyone gets attention. Especially if they want it. So those are just some things I've learned the hard way. And I started doing this work the hard way. I was teaching a course at Ohio State, photography for art teachers, basically, and we'd put prints, black and white at the time, prints on the wall, and I'd try to get a discussion going, and there was pretty much dead silence. It's like, well, what's going on here? You know, and I would ask questions, and they would say, well, it's sort of obvious. You can see it. What's there to talk about? So I wondered if other photographers had that problem, and sure enough, they did. People like Minor White have that problem. So, you know, he was devising ways to get people to respond. And that for me became a master's thesis. And then later on, a dissertation topic, how we can understand and respond to photographs. And again, without those responses, a photograph is not reality. You know, it's an opinion, it's someone's opinion about reality, and we want to get at that opinion, not just. It's not a replication, you know, of reality. So sometimes it's especially hard for me to get people to talk about representational photographs or documentary photographs. They're more willing, they seem more willing to talk about painting or sculpture that is non-representational. But other thoughts or comments?
I have a question. Thank you. I think you may have touched on this a little bit just now, but do you ever question the dissonance between the way a work of art operates and language? Like what language can do and not do, what a work of art can do and not do, and how, I mean, a critique by definition is using language around work, but language has its own limitations.
I'm having a hard time understanding what I can't understand you.
Oh, can you not hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't understand. It might be the math.
I'm just thinking about, like, something I would often say to studio artists was, if we could capture what the work of art is doing with language, then we could just use language. You wouldn't have to make the thing.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then in critiques are made of language, and so there's this dissonance between like the work and how we talk about it, and it's just like a gap to bridge, and I'm just curious if you have ideas about that.
Yeah, I think about that often, and sometimes I make art, and I try not to be a critic of the art that I'm making. I try not to interpret it, because it's like it's a different activity. Seems to be a different mindset, and I'm aware of the limitations of interpretation. But the more interpretations I get about a single work of art, the more I see how expansive those understandings can be. And I think I'm not worried about over-interpretation. I'm worried about under-interpretation. I think under-interpretation is a bigger problem than over-interpreting. So I don't know if that really gets at what you're getting at. What you're getting at seems to be a very big problem. So I don't want to treat it too lightly. Yes.
I had to wait for the mic because I have a soft voice.
I'm sorry, one more thought. For me and my process, it's very important that any of the interpretations are based in what we can see in the artwork. So I usually start with description, not always, but usually. But no matter what, I ask for description because I want to see that what they're saying is in the artwork and not just in their head or in their life. It's like I want some kind of connection. We're not doing science fiction here. We're not doing, Gestalt psychology. We're looking at images that someone has made. So I want the understandings to be, even though they're temporary and not really stable, I want them to be tied to the artwork somehow. And if the interpreter can't tie them to the artwork, for me it's not as good of an interpretation as the ones that can make sense out of Varro's image and grinding stars to feed the moon. And if they can build all that into an interpretation, I think something important is going on.
This is just a comment that relates to what Mary was saying. I'm kind of obsessed with having my students be with work in different ways and not just analytically. Like I'm trying to invent ways to do critique differently, just for that experience for them. And I just wanted to say that I'm right now having my students write fan fiction as the work, like kind of embody the work through fan fiction as critique. so that there's just a different way to kind of like really get into the work and what the essence of the work, what they feel it is. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And also because I felt very...
Stop there.
Okay.
I want to respond to the first part. Yeah, narratives are really a powerful way to get people into artworks, and I often ask them to complete the narrative that the artist suggests, or to write a story about Eggman and what happened, which is what they did. They all came up with their own narratives, and then they listened to one another and built other people's insights into a narrative. But I think, I think narratives are really important, a really good way to get people into what they're looking at. So, yeah, I'm glad you're doing that. Was there a part two?
Kind of, sorry, I didn't want to just chat, but I was moved when you talked about the way that critique often suggests that a work should be changed, because I think that there's the assumption there that the students aren't artists yet, and what they make isn't good enough yet. And I don't think that that's true, and I like for students to accept the work as it is, and that's another reason that I'm looking for other ways to talk about it.
I'm glad you brought that up. By me facilitating a discussion of what do you see in this work of art, what might it mean to you, and to hear a lot of discussion along that line, and then let the artist sit back, not defending the work, and let the artist decide. If we really interpret one of your works of art and you think we've misinterpreted it, well, you got a couple choices. You can say, well, they didn't get it, or you can say, I didn't do it yet. And I think that's so much more effective than trying to tell them what to do or how to do it. The way of telling them what to do and how to do it is a way to make them very dependent on me, the professor. And then they graduate, and then what? What am I going to do? Or they're no longer working for A's and B's and C's. I want them to be independent. I mean, I think we all want them to be independent artists. We don't want a bunch of dependent artists, dependent on authorities. So giving them the opportunity, I really like to tell students that in this critique, there's 20 of us or 10 of us. You're never going to get this much attention again in your life on your one work of art. It's not going to happen. Even if you get an exhibition and you get praise, you might get a pat on the back, but you're never going to get a discussion like this. It's over. So you better take advantage of this one now, or later in your life, keep having critiques of trusted artists, friends, or strangers. Joseph Kudelka came from Eastern Europe to New York City with a box of 8x10s photographs, and he showed them to people on the street one by one. And he didn't say anything. He just watched what they noticed and watched what they looked at. And he noted which one they spent more time on and which ones they didn't. So he was getting all kinds of information non-verbally, and it was a critique. And to him it was, I don't know what he did with it, but I imagine he did, well, this is interesting feedback. I got real people looking at my work, and they're making choices about it. Yes. Way in the back.
Thank you. Hello. Oh my gosh. Just going right off of what you said about graduating. I'm about to graduate, and I'm not going to be in this setting anymore where we're having critiques and spending time with other artists who are facilitating this kind of space of interpreting each other's works. So I was curious to see if you had any thoughts on how one might facilitate these kinds of spaces and discussions outside of an academic setting.
If I'm understanding you right, my response would be go find an audience. Go find someone who will give you a half hour or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or preferably an hour and get a community going, and take turns. And again, I would keep it, you would be the artist and you would determine what kind of feedback you wanted, but I would encourage you not to look for judgments, but to look for interpretations, impressions, how people are moved or not moved by what you're doing, and then you make the decision later. And hopefully you come away from that inspired to make more work. If you do that and it's a bummer of an evening, you don't want to go back, something's wrong there, I'm, as an artist, I'm very selective about who I show the work to. And I want a certain kind of feedback, and I don't want another kind of feedback. And I know pretty much where I can get what I want, and that's where I go. Because I have to keep my spirit alive, and I have to keep my enthusiasm alive. And that's not easy to do, especially when you're out of school, when you're on your own. Or if you're teaching, you're giving all this creative energy to your students, and you might not have much left for yourself. So you got to protect your own energy, and your own spirit.
Thank you.
Other thoughts? Well, you're a very generous audience. Thank you very much.